Well, good morning. And since it is recorded, we don't really need to give individuals a grace period. They can jump on and join. We've got what should be a great panel, and this is our second in a series of Ben Franklin webinars managing through this crisis. And this one is all about HR. So I'm Scott Nissenbaum. I'm the Chief Investment Officer and Executive Vice President for Ben Franklin, and I have an esteemed panel. We didn't, in the hurry up to get this all together, I don't have detailed background, so I am going to turn it over to each of you, if you don't mind, ask you to introduce yourself, give a little bit about yourself and your background, and then we'll just talk. This is more of a fireside chat than a pre-rehearsed panel, and so let's jump to it. Janice, if you don't mind, I'm going to throw it over to you.
Not at all. Janice Giannini, currently with Paradigm Associates, which is management consulting, focusing on for me personally, focusing on strategy and leadership, helping my clients, companies, organizations get more of what they want and less of what they don't want, so to speak, and grow top line, bottom line. My background was mostly corporate for many decades. Ran businesses, parts of manufacturing, product development, business development, front end of the business, all the way to aftermarket support. So pretty broad range of experience in terms of running companies and developing strategies and then putting plans in place to execute those strategies. I currently serve on the board for Ben, which I'm assuming is the reason I got the phone call, which is fine. So that's a little bit about me, and if you have any other questions, happy to answer them.
Great, thank you. And Marcia, we're gonna throw it over to you.
All right, thanks, Scott. Good morning, everyone. I'm Marcia O'Connor. I am CEO and founder of the O'Connor Group. We are an HR and talent acquisition consulting firm based out in King of Prussia for about 13 years. And my background, I started my world in Arthur Andersen as an auditor. And here I am in the HR world. But it's been a really active world. We'll go through all that. And I'm excited to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Of course. And last but not least, Bob.
Thank you. Bob Nagle. I am a management side labor and employment attorney. I've been practicing for about 22 years, based in Philadelphia and its environs. Currently, I'm with Fox Rothschild out of the firm's Montgomery County office in Bluebell. My practice includes small owner-managed businesses with maybe 5 or 10 employees on up to larger enterprises, Fortune 500 companies, running the gamut from, again, the smaller entities where I'm usually talking to the owner or the principal with no in-house legal, sometimes no in-house HR, the large organizations with in-house HR but not in-house legal, up to, companies with sophisticated legal departments. So I sort of operate along the full spectrum, advising employers both from the advice and counseling standpoint, on all manner of employment law topics, wage and hour, discrimination, non-compete, employment agreements, separation agreements from A to Z, and also litigation where necessary. So nice to join you guys this morning.
Great, thank you. And for those of you that are just joining us, we do have a panel. This panel is a follow-on to our last, which was issues in general and dealing with what's happening here in COVID and the pandemic. Cash was a really big message of conserve cash, hold cash, sort of streamline your operations. A lot of the outcome from those conversations comes back to one of the biggest expenses, which is the people. And for most businesses that we deal in high tech and early stage, people are the critical component. And so between the business perspective, the professional HR management, and the legal perspective, we want to try to step back and guide the entrepreneurs that are going to be listening to this webinar, give them a little bit of assistance and help in terms of our perspective of what we're seeing, what our clients are asking. And then as the questions roll forward, I want to remind anyone who is watching, you can click on the chat button, which is at the bottom, and the chat button will bring up your ability to type in and ask questions in real time. So please do that. I see Yasmin just joined us, so thanks for joining us. And so with that, let's start at the highest level. Each of you are interacting, each of you are talking with companies, and from an HR perspective, what do you see? What really on their mind right now? Is it about layoffs? Is it about hiring? Is it about the PPP or PPL or PPG, or we'll get into that too?
I can take that. I can tell you right now, it's really trying to save their people and trying to figure out the best way of doing it. They're looking at their cash right now and saying what we can do, what we can't do. It's not so much they're not working, a lot of them. It's the fact that receipts coming in. And I think a lot of companies are getting slower and slower in payment. So I think there's a fear behind that. There are also, a lot of them are tapped out right now with having a lot of debt on their books. So I think they're a little bit skeptical. The PPP, for some, a lot of us were either on Friday or Monday, and I've heard some of them already had gotten their money, which is amazing, and some are probably going to be a little bit longer than that. So it's figuring out what to do with that, because you can only, majority of it you can use for payroll, but you also can use it obviously for your medical, you can use it for your utilities, but only so much. It can't be more than 25% of the total. I think people are a little overwhelmed about that entire deal. I think the biggest thing is right now saving people so they don't go on unemployment.
Wow. And you know, the thing I heard first and foremost, which was the people have applied for and gotten the PPP money already. And I want to come back to that, but let's hear from Janice and Bob, and definitely hit on who that bank was and how do we get in line. So
I can go next. One of the big concerns is, I'll phrase it as, what do I tell people? How much do I tell people? What it is I'm supposed to be doing as far as helping to keep people calm. And I mean, I can go through some of that now, or we can come back to it later. But one of the biggest jobs, I'll call it right now, of leaders in companies, whether it's a small, mid-size, or whether it's a multi-billion-dollar Fortune 25 company, is to help keep people calm and focused on what they're doing to keep an even keel, and figure out how to help people feel valued so that they don't get discouraged and they stay focused on the job at hand.
Yep. And Janice immediately comes to my mind of the captain in the storm, right? You know, do your job, keep the ship safe, focus on your work, don't worry about the storm. Just, you know, if everybody does their job, the ship will be fine. And that's
right. And the challenging part about that is that probably 80 to 85% of the population is driven by fear and loss, and only about 15% of the population is really driven by possibility and opportunity. So if you have lots of folks that are naturally driven by fear and loss, and this is going on around them, it escalates their internal discomfort to the point where it could be catastrophic for them personally as well as the company. So there's a lot of things you can do to help that, but helping people stay on an even keel is critical.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Janice. And Bob, what about you? What from your perspective are you seeing out there? What are the questions you're getting?
So it's kind of interesting. We've gone through a little bit of an arc of issues, I feel like, with my clients anyway. It seems like about 3 weeks ago, even prior to Governor Wolf issued the first statewide shutdown order, clients were anticipating what was coming. They're anticipating, you know, tremendous drop-offs in foot traffic if they're retailers, or you know, sales if they're in non-retail context. And the questions were around, you know, how do I downsize my workforce? How do I implement a layoff? What is a layoff anyway? Am I firing people? Am I just, you know, furloughing them, which is a term which has sort of come back into vogue after many years in disuse. Lots of questions around that. What are my obligations to pay people if they're not working? Can employees stay on my benefits if they're not working for any period of time? So 3 weeks ago, I feel like the questions were about how do we reduce our staff to cope with an environment where we're not really having any sales or revenue coming in. 2 weeks ago, the questions were all around the FFCRA with the paid sick leave entitlement and the paid expanded family and medical leave entitlements. And I expect we'll talk about that more a little later in our discussion this morning. And then last week, it seemingly was all CARES Act. You know, how do I get PPP loans? You know, if I'm too big for that, what do I do to get this other, you know, tranche of money that's been made available? What are the restrictions around that? So it seems like, you know, the questions are coming in waves, although certainly the questions around downsizing, reducing comp for employees? What about their benefits? And how does that tie into CARES Act money? That's been the last week or so, I would say.
Got it. And there's a lot to unpack there. Before we dig too deep in, I think you got to come at this as a leader with a calm head, and I think part of that is the messaging and the way in which you speak to your people. And so, Janice, I want to bring it back to you in terms of how do you instill calm in a storm like this, where there are more unknowns than there are knowns, and the realities of it aren't very calming. So
there are a number of things that you can do. The first thing that I always recommend and share with my clients is that you want to be straightforward and honest with people. All of those creepy questions in the back of your mind that you're afraid to talk about, everybody's thinking about those questions anyway. So just get them on the table. Be honest with people. Tell them what you know. Tell them what you don't know. It's okay to say, we don't have answers to that yet. We're working on it. When we get a little bit more understanding, we will share that with you. A couple of tactical things that folks can do, and how frequently you do this is a function of your business and how big it is and what have you. But have a meeting with everybody and just say, hey, we just want to do an update. It doesn't have to be 5 hours. It can be 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it needs to be. But share what's going on in the update, focusing on the reality-based positive side of what's happening. Cash, everybody's conserving cash. Cash is an issue. Everybody's worried about, will I have a job? Do I need to start looking for a job? What's going to happen? Just say, and I'm making this up, obviously, we've got cash for the next 6 months. We're fine. We are looking at alternatives because we're not sure what's going to happen after that. Is the economy going to bounce back instantaneously, or is it going to take a couple of months to bump along before it bounces back? And chances are that it's not going to bounce back instantaneously, because everybody has exactly the same issues that the company that you're leading has. So as a result of that, the first thing you do in a crisis is you figure out what you need to do. The second thing is you figure out how to recover from it and how to pay for it. So all of that is going on. Controlling rumors and drama is critical. Having a conversation with each person individually for one purpose only that I'll get to is important, but if you want to disseminate information, you should do everybody at the same time, because you're going to naturally say things differently to one person and the other, and that's going to start a rumor. You don't want rumors and drama. You want people to stay focused and calm and feel valued. So if you're in a small enough company where you can actually call people for a few minutes to say, hey, just checking in, how you doing, that helps them so that they feel like they're not getting lost in the shuffle. There's a book out there that I will share with you. It's not directly applicable, but the principle is, and the book is called The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. The gist of the book is that there's a difference between being loved and feeling loved. And there are, in his world, 5 ways that you feel loved. So you could love someone with all of your heart, but if they don't feel loved and you're not giving that love in the way that they need to hear it or feel it or experience it, they don't feel loved. What is the translation to the work environment? What is it that your employees need to feel valued and to know that you didn't forget them and they're not just a number? For some people, it's an emoji on a text. For some people, it's a voicemail that says, hey, was thinking about you. No, you can't talk, no big deal, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's a bazillion ways to do that. It's a little bit harder when you're all virtual, but it is still possible. And you can, just by listening to people and observing them, you actually can get a pretty good sense, I think, in a lot of cases, of what they need. So being a little bit more sensitive to that. It's not about the touchy-feely part of the business. I mean, I come at business from a, what do the numbers say? What does the strategy say? How do we make it work? And yes, we absolutely are worried about the people, and we need to deal with the people, because without people, you've got no business. And I don't care what size business you have, whether it's the 25 billion or the 50,000 business, the people are the thing that runs your business. So it's not about the touchy-feely as much as it's about the fact that the business runs because you have a group of dedicated people, smart people who understand And everybody needs to kind of do what they can in order to not only keep the company solvent, but start looking at what comes next and how you're going to navigate all of this space in a thoughtful, rational manner.
Got it. Thank you. I think the point you made really sticks true, which is if you're not straight with them, then you're most certainly going to start to lose them. So, and that's a carefully balancing act because there are a lot of unknowns. I do want to come back. Marcia, you mentioned earlier about the PPP and some of the dollars, and people have already gotten it. So if you don't mind, give us a little bit of that story, and if you don't mind, be specific, because I'm sure there are a number of people that are listening here, and they are freaked out by either the process, the lack of a process, or the outcome.
Yeah, so that was, I'm part of the Goldman Sachs 10,000 small business and that whole feed line. And ironically enough, I think he said he had gotten his money in it, but he was also from, I guess, the outside regions, and it was a small bank. He didn't mention, it was basically like one of the family banks in the area that already had it in his thing, but he didn't tell us the name. He said it's working because the bigger banks are having problems. Obviously, Wells Fargo has had its share and it cut it off. And then Bank of America obviously had people applying on Friday. I think Meridian and Fulton Bank did too. And then I have TD Bank. I'm super pleased with them. They did a phenomenal job. It did crash the first 5 minutes, but then it came back up about 45 minutes later and all too, and everything went through. But I think a lot of people are probably very overwhelmed with that too, Scott. And I can tell you right now, my accountant who put all my information together for me last week, because I was on it already, she said majority of her clients called her yesterday to ask her to put this information together yesterday. And she said there was no way we could have done everything yesterday because it does take a while for them to pull all the payroll reports and everything else that was needed. So if there's any words of the wise, it's just, 6 P's, proper planning, prevents poor performance. And you really have to talk to other people, be in other chats. Like, this is huge because I think we're all in this together, but there's so many unanswered questions right now that like I said before in HR, I'm sure, Bob, you're seeing this too. It's almost like we're making this up as we go along because we're being asked all these different questions and we don't even know sometimes we're telling the right answer. I mean, right now, to get into work, most people have to get their temperature done. And people are saying, well, okay, doesn't that put that person at harm because couldn't they be susceptible? Should I give them a mask? Should I give them gloves? It's like, yeah, you should give them masks, you should give them gloves and make sure they're okay with it and all too because that there's a liability there, but that's basically how people are going to work right now. And so it's changing a lot of the rules as we go along, day by day.
Understood. And so Bob, as you dig into the PPP and you start to think about, getting the capital and then some of the repercussions of not getting the capital, how do you start to think about, how do you start to manage, the future where expenses in salaries and the revenues just aren't there to match it? Is there a strong recommendation at this point where we are in the pandemic from a furlough or 1 day off or layoffs, reduction in forces? I mean, there's a lot of different ways to slice this, and then we need to unpack, if there is a right answer, what that means from a liability and legal repercussions.
A lot there, so let me try to unpack it as best I can. Somebody made a comment earlier in the discussion about unemployment or a desire to keep employees off unemployment. I would say, to the extent there was ever a stigma around collecting unemployment benefits, that ought not to drive decisions at this point. If anything, what I'm starting to hear from some of my clients who are open and operational and are attempting to stay that way is employees have seen and heard the numbers around $600 on top of the regular unemployment benefit, and they're sort of opting out of working, and they would rather, not to be kind of seemingly coarse about it, quote, sit home and collect unemployment rather than take what they perceive to be undue risks in coming to work and potentially getting exposed and potentially exposing loved ones to the virus. So I'm sort of helping clients kind of guard against that extreme, but for I think most businesses and maybe a lot of the folks listening today, the government appropriated hundreds of billions of dollars to supplement state unemployment benefit funds because the government shut down our economy, right? They shut down businesses and they have essentially said, we will pay your people, whether because you aren't open and not operating and it doesn't make sense for you to, quote, work when there's nothing for them to do, furlough them. Just a little overlay for this discussion, really for the rest of this discussion, unless I get a specific question. Let's assume we're talking about Pennsylvania employees. Pennsylvania is an at-will state. Let's assume we're not talking about folks with specific employment contracts that may guarantee them compensation. And I've had some conversations with clients about force majeure and wait a minute, I'm supposed to pay this guy, 200 grand a quarter and I've got no sales. He's not doing anything. Can I adjust his contract? I'm just sort of talking about the run-of-the-mill, non-contracted at-will employee. Furlough those folks if you don't have anything for them to do. Let them collect unemployment. And I think the sort of general high-level thinking has been, hopefully May is going to be better than April, and June's going to be better than May. And Marcia and Janice, I think, have already talked a little bit about the timing of getting the loans. You're supposed to use the Paycheck Protection Program loans mostly for your payroll costs, and your loan forgiveness is evaluated with reference to, did you apply those funds to payroll costs in the 8-week period after you get the money? And oh, by the way, the pertinent period for using those funds ends June 30. So it's April 7, right? I can't believe I haven't heard any clients yet who have gotten money, but Marcia has, so that's wonderful. But if you're anticipating getting the money this week or early next week, you've got an 8-week window really to use it for your payroll. If you anticipate that you actually might have business activity in May and June, now is the time you want to start thinking about, using that money and maybe calling people back so they're ready, when business picks up, hopefully in May and June.
Got it. And Janice, I don't know if you want to jump in here or Marcia on specifically around the concept of furloughing, laying off, because that 8 weeks feels like, after being 4 weeks in this, with 8 weeks ahead of us, doesn't seem as long as it did 4 weeks ago, and so what do you, as you think 8 weeks out, are we really better off to really deal with the 1 week at a time, 1 month at a time before we start to get too far out, or what's the right answer there, if you don't mind?
I can share a few thoughts on that. First of all, I'm not sure that anybody knows what the right answer is. I would say that you look at it in like 2 month increments, 2 months, 4 months, and 6 months. We are all assuming, based on the curves, that we are going to peak in April and early May, and therefore, or mid-May, depending on where you are globally, obviously, certainly in the United States. By mid-May, I think everybody peaks and it starts to get better. We're all kind of making an assumption that by the end of May, life is going to start getting back to normal. That's a rational assumption to make right now, and so you put a plan in place for that. However, the question does get raised of, is it going to be June? Is it going to be July? I mean, how jerky is that curve? Because it's not going to go straight back up again. My experience personally between furloughing and laying off was that laying off was a more expensive proposition for the company. And if you know that there is a short-term end in sight, for example, in a company where there's a seasonality to it, there is one industry that routinely for 3 months of the year furloughs their employees and then they bring them back. That's just the way their business works. So if you think it's that model, then furloughing kind of works. I'm not saying for every company in every state that the rules are the same, but my experience has been laying people off is a more expensive proposition than furloughing, but that might not be across the board. I'm not an expert at that.
Marcia, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, sure do. So I've been doing tons of, it's interesting when this first came out, just give you perspective here. I was asked to be a part of a panelist to talk about furloughs or layoffs about 2 weeks ago. Guys, we had 773 people attending this webinar around the world. And the questions, we could even keep up with the questions and all too. But I can tell you, typically a furlough is put in place when you know an end. Typically, the problem with this whole thing is we don't know an end to it. Now, a furlough has a little bit of a different connotation to an employee than being laid off. A laid off is basically you're done, go get unemployment, and hopefully things will work out. Furlough is like, hey, we're trying to take care of you. You can still get unemployment. You know, apparently can't get the first week. That might have changed now with this the CARES Act. But, you know, they're supposed to pay for your benefits if they can pay for the benefits, like the medical side of the house. Now, this PPP was put in play so that we don't do that right now. So you need to be careful. So if you do lay off or you basically furloughed people and you're getting that PPP, you have until June 30th basically to hire those people back. The whole idea is that they're trying to not have people go on unemployment or be furloughed at all. If I was basically, and it's a case by case experience, like one of my clients, he has 29 employees, and he said, I have cash in the bank. He goes, but if I don't furlough them right now, I don't know when we're not coming back. We won't have any cash whatsoever, and I will have no company. So he furloughed all 29 people. And ironically enough, typically the furlough laws say that you can't have any interaction, no emails, no phone call. If you even have 1 hour, you have to pay them for that full day. Well, I think the rules are changing out there because I hear people going on furlough and they're still having, you know, conversations and they're still having emails and they're still having phone calls. Well, they're not doing work. They're just doing like check-ins. Technically, you're supposed to pay them for that. But I'm like, well, who's really going to complain about that right now? We're just trying to keep everybody together. So as I mentioned before, I think the rules are being changed, but there is a big difference of a connotation of a furlough versus a layoff right now. And if you're doing the PPP, I wouldn't do any furlough and layoff until we get those funds in. Or if you do, keep in mind, you're probably going to have to bring them back before June 30th.
Yeah. And so, Bob, I want to
respond to a comment that Marcia made. First of all, the Pennsylvania Department of Labor has waived that 1 week waiting requirement. So employees are now eligible basically from day one of the layoff, and that has been in place, I think, for about 3 weeks now. They've also waived the requirement that employees be actively looking for work, which ordinarily is a requirement to collect unemployment. You have to be out looking and certify you're out looking. PA Department of Labor has waived that. The one other piece I'd just like to expand upon a bit from what Marcia said with regard to the furlough. Again, I think furlough kind of has a nicer connotation to it. It does connote an expectation that you're going to come back at some point. There is such a thing as an indefinite furlough. You know, I've advised clients, you know, you could say, you know, right now we're furloughing everybody through the end of this month or the end of April. When I was having these conversations last month, you know, we don't have a hard return to work date. It's our hope that we can bring you back by the end of April. However, this is a very fluid situation. We may not be able to do so. Again, if you're talking about at-will employees in Pennsylvania, you're not really committing yourself. You're not creating little implied contracts that they get to come back on a certain day. Really, the only kind of third rail you need to worry about, which is pretty far off in the, off to the right, if you will, is WARN Act exposure, where if you're laying off a sufficient number of employees and you're sufficiently large, if they're out for 6 months and you didn't give notice, then that potentially could become a legal issue. But sort of piecemealing it a month at a time, I don't think creates any legal problems. Morale problems, and is it better to, sort of, if we think it's going to be 3 months, should we just tell them up front 3 months? I defer to Janice and Marcia on that. But the other piece I wanted to mention that everybody should be thinking about is health insurance coverage. And in a furlough context, what I have seen, what I have heard anecdotally, and this is not an excuse not to do your own due diligence, but what I have heard anecdotally is that a lot of the big insurers are taking the position that a furlough of a month or 6 weeks or even 2 months does not necessarily constitute a qualifying event for COBRA purposes. And therefore, the carrier is willing to continue to allow the employer to carry that person as a regular participant in the health plan if the employer can pay the premium and is willing to pay the premium. And there's money in the federal stimulus programs for employers to do that. That's part of the PPP, is paying for employees' health insurance coverage. Not viewed as a COBRA event if it's a furlough, Whereas if it's a layoff, meaning you're actually terminated and you would actually have to reapply to come back to work and requalify, that certainly is going to be a COBRA event. Huge takeaway for everybody listening today, though, is to talk to your own broker and get confirmation from the insurer how they will treat this event. Because I have heard at least one horror story, I think it was actually pre what I call, COVID storm, where a carrier after the fact denied coverage on a very high dollar claim by an employee where the employer had just sort of gratuitously carried them on the rolls for a month. And the insurer said, no, that was a COBRA event. You should have put them on COBRA. Had they put them on COBRA, they would have been covered anyway.
Wow.
But the carrier exploited the technicality to say, nope, you screwed up. We're not paying, you pay. So just a word of the wise, talk to your broker and make sure you know what your obligations are vis-a-vis your health insurance coverage for your people.
Appreciate that. And I want to turn because one of our entrepreneurs has a question. And it's a great question from Yasmin. It's what's best for the employees? Because I feel like right now we're most certainly taking an employer perspective, understanding the plans and the reimbursement. But when you really balance this, you want these people, you care about these people, you want them back, you want to support them, but you have to balance the health and the safety of the business. So what is a better option for them? Are they better off to be laid off and collect unemployment and immediately go on COBRA? Is a furlough, taking into account, clearly they want to keep their job and they want to come back. And so is it easier to furlough and then bring them back, or is it easier to lay off and then when this thing settles down to bring them back from a financial standpoint and from a morale standpoint?
I think everything regarding the best way to do it, the least expensive I've seen, to instead of like reassuring everybody coming on board, is furlough. But the thing is the benefit side, as Bob mentioned it too, and it's very important you do check with your providers and how your plans are written. They're all written very, very differently. And so because of that, I think a lot of people are like a little bit surprised about, oh my God, I didn't realize all that. Now the fine print is really coming to light. So if I were to do it, I would say, make sure that you can afford it. And if you can't afford it, they're going to have to go on COBRA kind of a deal. And just be honest and be yourself and be that leader to say, this is where I'm at right now, and I don't want to do this, but unfortunately, we won't have a business if I don't do this. So just be real, figure out what you can do, what you can't do, and lay it on the line, because we're all in this together. They need to understand that too. But furloughing is a little bit more simpler. It's a little easier to bring them back on board. But again, it involves medical. If you can afford that medical for so many months, I would highly recommend more the furlough side. But if you can't, you're going to have to do the layoff and they go on COBRA.
So is the medical sounds like a pretty big driver, and obviously it's a big overall cost of employees, and so that medical differentiation is real. And so is there a better answer, or does your answer change if you want to bring everybody back? It sounds like the answer is furlough, but I don't want to make that assumption. Bob, is there a legal difference? Is it easier to bring everybody back after a furlough versus a layoff?
Well, so let's make sure we're all understanding what these terms mean. And I thought Marcia did a nice job explaining a furlough. It's really an indefinite or a definite leave of absence imposed upon the employee by the employer, usually for lack of work. If you remember, over years past, there have been government shutdowns. The government workers are furloughed. They're told not to come to work because they're not going to get paid. So don't come to work. Here, it's we have no work for you, and therefore we're not going to pay you. Layoff is actually not a legally significant term. I think the way we've been using it here is it actually is just a euphemism for you're being terminated. Sorry, it's not a performance issue. It's we have no work for you. Think U.S. Steel and Chrysler in the early 80s. Like, you're being laid off because we have too many workers, right? No work for you. One point. So furlough does seem to be a softer term. It does seem to actually have the connotation of I'm expected to come back at some point. Furlough goes hand in glove with recall. What's my recall date? That can be very fluid and even employee specific, as the case may be. With respect to the economic piece, though, know that under Pennsylvania law, the max unemployment benefit, I believe, is about $573 a week, and that's a function of the employee's own income. So if they're making $10 an hour, they're not going to qualify for $573 a week. But if they're making $1,500 or $2,000 a week, they probably would, and they could make $1 million. They're not getting more than $573 a week. But with that additional $600 on top of it, which is, as far as I can tell, like automatic. Like, even if you're a part-time employee, that's not prorated. So Uncle Sam is shoveling money out to the states to help people, okay? And the unemployment part of that, like I said, there should be no stigma. And I think there's a way. I'm not going to hog the mic and try to articulate every possibility, because I know Janice and Marcia have things to say too. But I think there's definitely a way for employers to let their people collect unemployment. And you can call it a furlough. They're just off the schedule. A reduction in hours can qualify them for unemployment. Going from full-time to part-time could qualify them for part-time unemployment. There's a way to have them tap into that money that Uncle Sam wants them to have, while still keeping them technically employed with some connection to the organization and making sure their health insurance benefits get paid for. I think all of those things can be done.
Wow.
This is Janice. If I could just weigh in for a minute on this. We're talking about what's best and the emotions and the difference between furlough and layoff. At the end of the day, being a numbers person, the answer is it depends on what the numbers say. It's really simple. You sit down and you do the arithmetic. It's emotionally traumatic, but the arithmetic is pretty straightforward. You do the arithmetic, and whatever the arithmetic says you need to do in order to not have your business go under is probably what you're going to do. And you don't have to feel great about it. You just have to, in a timely manner, make the appropriate decision and implement it at the appropriate time, so that you will survive as a business to the other end, and then you pick up the pieces and regrow.
And Janice, I want to stress this point, because I think, Bob, you've mentioned the word stigma, and Janice, you're talking about, following the numbers. And for so many entrepreneurs, this isn't about the numbers. This is about the people. And so they may be hesitant to take that action because of the morale issue, or because of the impact it'll have, or the message it'll send to their employees, or just the fear that those employees will be gone when this thing, when the sun comes out and they want to start the business again. And so is it the same advice to those individuals? Do the numbers, figure it out, reassure your people, and when the sky's clear, we will bring you back. But in the meantime, we need to take every step we can to make sure we're still here when you come back. Is that sound about right?
I agree. How you say it is a function of your own personal communication style. There are some things that you can do in the current environment to stay a little closer to the people, so that they know that you're not just kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. But I think that particularly in small companies where folks understand what's going on, if there's no business to come back to, that doesn't help anybody.
Right.
And so the prime objective is, how do we have collectively a business to come back to? And just be honest. And it's going to be really hard for some people, because they're not numbers people. And some of those conversations, I have seen some leaders actually break down in tears. Guys, it's okay. It is what it is, because you have to have a business to come back to. What is your objective? You need to understand and be really clear about what your objective is. And your objective is to have a business and to figure out how to protect your people. But you can't protect your people if you have no business. So therefore, have business is number one, having a business to come back to. And if that's your driver, then you suck it up, quite frankly, and you just struggle through emotionally and do what you have to do.
Yeah, unfortunately so. And so we've talked a lot about the PPP program, and we've talked about furloughing and layoffs and the healthcare impact. The CARES Act is pretty in-depth, and I'll be honest, with everything flying at us, I have not read all of the legislation. I hope neither of you. But there are other programs out there, if I'm correct. And are there other areas that maybe most people aren't focused on that they should be, either in the CARES Act or otherwise?
There are other loans that you guys could look into. I think it's the EIDL. There's the disaster loan out there. SBA has and all too. There's a lot of grants going on out there. And if you're a women business owner, there's even Spanx is giving out grants right now. They had an application that went out yesterday. Montgomery County is having its own grants for small businesses right now too. And so that goes, I think it's either today or tomorrow. That goes, I think tomorrow, it goes live around noontime to apply for that. So there's a lot of different things you could be applying for. And right now, apply for everything. I know it takes a lot of time, but they'll say no. Okay, well, at least you tried. And it's basically if you can pay for rent for another month or a payroll, it's completely worth it. I think that there's still, I'm seeing Margaret's question on here about the PPP and the local and state support and payroll tax forgiveness and CARES. I'm not so sure on CARES, but I know it is a payroll tax forgiveness in regards to the Family Act when somebody goes on sick leave and the government would pay for it. I'm still a little confused of how that completely works because it comes out of the payroll taxes and that's how it gets paid back. But there is something in that. I don't know, Bob, do you know about the CARES Act? Is there something in there about payroll tax forgiveness on that side?
Yeah, if you bear with me 1 minute, I might be able to give some actually useful information on point. You're absolutely right that the paid sick leave and paid family medical leave benefits mandated by the FFCRA, which passed 2 weeks ago, are designed to be cost neutral on the employer. And there is a mechanism by which employers can recoup whatever it is that they paid out. For those we haven't talked about it yet, the paid sick leave mandate is 80 hours of paid sick leave. That mandate applies to all employers with under 500 employees. So probably most people on this call. Really no industry-specific carve-out. And the basic entitlement is 80 hours of paid sick leave for a qualifying event. Now, what's critical to understand is there has to actually be work available for the employee, right? So if the business is already closed, either because it's not a life-sustaining business or because they made a business decision to close their doors, or they furloughed third shift, right? Or they closed this department temporarily, the employee only qualifies for paid sick leave benefits if but for their qualifying event, which is they've been diagnosed with COVID-19, or a loved one in their household has been diagnosed with COVID-19, or they cannot come to work because they have to care for their children and their children's schools are closed. If that's the event that prevents them from going to work, then they're eligible for up to 80 hours of paid sick leave, and that applies to employees who have 30 days of service or more. The mechanism, getting back to Marcia's question, there's a mechanism with the quarterly payroll tax reports that the employer is required to file with the IRS to claim against that. And I've even seen it written, and our firm's website has a treasure trove of resources, foxrothschild.com. We've got over, I think, 150 pieces on the various federal and state legislative actions and executive actions on point. I saw it written that you could actually claim against what you owe for payroll. So it's not like you have to wait for Uncle Sam to cut you a check back. You can just offset it against what you also would have owed. However, I think this is what Marcia was driving at. I'm going to try to find it online. If you're not taking advantage of paycheck protection loans, I think there's another avenue for you to claim against your payroll taxes due for employees separate and apart from the paid sick leave piece. Let me see if I can find that, and let's see if Janice has anything she'd like to add.
I actually am not qualified to comment on that because I've not read enough of it. So I'm going to take a pass on this question, guys.
No worries, no worries. And so, Marcia, throwing it back to you, have the rules changed from a liability standpoint? You hinted at it that maybe they're not the same, but I know there are, obligations as an employer in the way you treat your employees. I don't know the law guides most of our companies. They treat them well above and beyond, but where is that line, and has it moved?
I think it's a case by case process to answer that question, because some companies, are doing a great job in keeping communication with their team and what's going on and pieces like that. And to be honest with you, some have put their head in the sand completely because they're scared to death. And I think it really depicts the furlough. Should my client be having communications with his people because they're technically on furlough? Probably not, but you know what? He wants to have people to come back to, and he realizes his team, it's like family to him, and he's trying to take care of them. Will he get in trouble for that? Hopefully not, but who knows? And it's like I said, it's making up as we go along. Ironically enough, I think the CARES Act is definitely a good thing, but I think there's so much in it that it too is overwhelming for a lot of people to decipher. So again, we get asked these questions all the time, and to me, I just say, be human, be honest, be that leader, show compassion, show empathy and all too. Now, there'll be people that will want to take advantage of the situation too. There always is, in good times and bad. So you just have to figure out, who's doing that, and you got to have some kind of guidelines to stick with and all too, because you got to keep in mind, you're trying to take care of not just your company, your employees, but your own mental self as well right now, because you're the CEO, so it's hard to talk to other people right now. So make sure that you do it, but use your head, guys, and do the right thing, no matter what. If I get in trouble down the road because I'm helping and talking to people so much, so be it. But I'm trying to just keep my team together.
Got it. Janice, do you want to add? Because I have. Yep.
I would say at this point that it is if there's any common sense in the world, it is unlikely that there would be repercussions from that. There's a difference between holding staff meetings and strategy conversations and just keeping in touch with people, even socially. You could easily keep in touch with people socially and achieve the objectives that you're trying to in order to keep people together and recognize that, yes, it's a tough time and we don't have firm answers, but the expectation is that we are going to come back together again.
Got it.
Hey, Scott, just quickly picking up on what other tax credits might there be in the CARES Act? There is a provision for employee retention credits separate and apart from the tax credits that can be used to fund the sick leave and family medical leave mandates imposed on businesses. The details are around, it just says the maximum wages, including health plan expenses that may be taken into account for all calendar quarters, is up to $10,000 per employee. And there are other requirements that have to be met, but there's more tax forgiveness and tax relief baked into that CARES Act that everybody should be looking at.
So when you're at home and trying to figure out what you're going to do with your free time, reading the CARES Act and some of these other things may actually pay off.
Right.
And so we have about 10 minutes left. I do want to ask, because some of this is a very sobering conversation. And but we at Ben Franklin have started to have virtual lunchrooms where everybody jumps on Zoom, not for your typical meeting, but just to stay connected with other people. I mean, this is an HR panel. This is about people, and people are social beasts. And so if you don't mind, share how you're keeping the cultural feel or how you would suggest keeping the cultural feel with your employees. And then I'm going to come back and do a quick commercial message before we break. So Marcia, you want to kick us off?
Absolutely. So what we do is, we try to have as much fun as we possibly can, obviously, but we have every day we have a 15-minute huddle. And we actually do it from 12 to 12:15. And we go around the room. We started going around the room like, what's the temperature? How you feeling? And it got a little gloomy. And so I said, hey, how about good news of the day? Because we're all working with our clients, how things happening. And that seemed to be a little bit better. We now have wear your favorite hat day. We have wear your college sweatshirt day. We had introduce your pet day, introduce your kid day. So we've had a bunch of different really fun things. I think this week we're going to do, dress up like your favorite rock star. We're trying to really just make it fun for 15 minutes, something for them to do. We actually had show your kid picture as a kindergarten. And that was fun. I mean, we're trying to really think outside the box to make them something to look forward to every day. How are we doing? We had one of our people leave on Friday, but we knew about that for 2 months. And we actually put together, everybody said a little message on their phone, and my son's in the video. So he put together a really nice goodbye video for her, and I felt bad because she was bawling her eyes out, but it was really nice that we were all trying to be there together to support her and wish her well and all too, and keep together a really tight knit. But it's 15 minutes a day, guys, and I've done that from day one, and they look forward to that because it sort of keeps us all together. We did last week too think of the old game, the Newlywed Game. and we put it in as how well do you know your associate game? And we picked 8 people and we asked questions to one group and one questions to the other group. And it was great. Ironically enough, we have 32 people. We have 3 men and the guys won. And so it was a lot of fun, but it was something out of the box thinking and making them laugh. I'm trying to make them laugh as much as we can.
Good. Thank you. Janice, Bob, anything you want to add on there?
I would just say, building on that, I think that's really great. Some teams are not quite at that level of making it that much fun and spending that much time doing that. But one of the things that you really want to make sure you do with, and I agree, you need to keep in regular contact, short snippets. It doesn't have to be 15 minutes is fine, whether it's every day, every other day, what have you, is make sure that I call it BMW. Bitch, moan, whine. You don't get more than 2 minutes if you have to. Sometimes people just have to. They can't move on, but there's a time limit. You don't get more than 2 minutes of BMW, and then you have to move on to something else.
And does that whine, does that have an H in it, or is it no H? Because I'm
it can be either, depending on where you are and the time of day.
All right.
Well, just to bookend that comment, I'd like, Scott and everybody to know that in law firms are a rock in a stormy sea. There's been literally no effort paid to making sure we're enjoying ourselves or having fun. To the contrary, we have been, crazy busy for the last few weeks, drinking from a fire hose, as Marcia, I think, noted. The laws, this law is 2 weeks old, right? I mean, part of my practice is HR compliance. That law was passed in 1938. There's pretty well-developed body of case law, trying to figure out some of the more obscure provisions of the CARES Act. We're all, trying to learn it at the same time. So, all of us are working remotely. That's when we should feel fortunate, I think, that, we're in a field, like probably most of the people on the call are able to work remotely, and at least some of your folks are able to work remotely. And, all of the staff, everybody's connected online. I'm communicating with my legal assistant throughout the day. Hey, can you, we got a filing. The federal courts are still open. The state courts are mostly closed. But I had to file a brief in federal court on Friday. So I think that our firm's, objective is to try to keep it business as usual to the greatest extent possible and be there for the clients. But, lawyers are never, traditionally like a real soft, let's make sure we're enjoying ourselves bunch. That's not in our DNA.
So what I heard is lawyers don't need fun. They just don't work. So that's what I had always thought, but I'm appreciate because this is being recorded. Now we have it on the record.
Institutional goal, Scott. Let's say it's not an institutional goal.
Got it. Understood. So, and so I want to have some wrap-up comments here. I also want to thank Yasmin for some great questions. Yasmin's final question is about fundraising in this environment. And honestly, we couldn't agree more at Ben Franklin, because if you think about it, let's get the calm. That was our first webinar. What the heck is going on? The second one is all about people and the HR issues. Well, there's only so much you can save to get yourself out of this. And if you can't sell, then the third option is to raise capital. And so our next webinar that is coming up, JB, feel free to unmute here and jump in. Our next webinar that's coming up is all about fundraising. We have a West Coast VC. We've got some East Coast angels. We've got some East Coast investors. And so the next conversation, Yasmin, is going to be about, are you, should you, can you, how do you fundraise in this environment? What does it mean? I had a question, and I'm not going to go there because one of my questions was about bonuses and incentive comp. And honestly, it just doesn't feel like the right time to be asking about bonuses or incentive comp. Even if you're due it, like maybe just give that some thought. So, JB, when is the next webinar? We don't have that yet?
So yeah, the next one is next Tuesday at 10 o'clock. We're sticking to that slot, and we're definitely going to have some folks both from local capital and national capital on board. We want to make sure we've got as many diverse interests as we possibly can. So should be an interesting conversation. Got it.
All right. And then, so any final comments from each of the three of you? Before we lose you and before we log off, I do want to thank each of you. I do think this was helpful. There is a lot of information that is still out there. It can't be absorbed in an hour, but there are programs. Take advantage of them. Do the math and take the people into consideration. So anything else you guys want to add?
Bob, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. I would just say, as a leader of the organization, make sure you do your deep breathing twice a day. because you are, the tone is set by you. And if people see that you start to fray, you're toast. So the first thing you need to do really is make sure you do your deep breathing, you get your 8 hours of sleep, whatever it is you need to do in order to stay calm, not artificially calm, but truthfully calm as best you can, because everyone sees that and they are taking their lead from you, whether you realize it or not.
Scott, if it's okay, I'll give Marcia the last word and try to answer the question. That was just because I actually did note that question on the bonus and incentive comp. Look at the plan document and look at the agreements. Hopefully, if they're well written, there should be some language in there that makes it at the discretion of the board to approve a bonus at any point in time or any sort of incentive comp. And if you don't have that language in the plan document or the employee agreement, then it's a conversation to have. If there's force majeure type language in the employment agreement, that would give the employer some leverage. But if not, then it really comes down to the kind of relationship, that you have now, and what kind of relationship does that employee want to have going forward? Are they sort of going to take one for the team and agree to defer it, 3 to 6 months, or are they going to be a pig, as other people are getting laid off and they're like, where's my 75 grand? I hit my number. That's a conversation I think, that could go a couple different ways. Thank you all.
And I'll just end, guys, real quick. First of all, thanks for inviting me today. Hang in there. I tell my team every day, today's one day closer till this is over. And, you got to be positive, that you got to be real. If you have a bad day, it's okay to share with them you're having a bad day. But, I'm trying to be as real as I can with my team. But I do agree with Janice. If you are sweating, they're taking a bath. And you want to make sure that you keep it real and all too, that you're here to help. But make sure you are also use these great chat rooms to talk to each other and just let go. Like I use EOS, Entrepreneur Operating System, and my coach, Hank, I just called him yesterday and I just said, hey, is it okay for me to feel a little scared as well? And he goes, absolutely. I said, because I feel like I've had it all on my shoulders and my whole team right now. And they're scared and I'm trying to protect all of them. But I felt as if it was really good to talk to him yesterday because I was just letting myself let it out. And every few days, you know what, I cry too. And it's okay to cry because sometimes you just got to get that toxins out of you because you're holding it in. And it's okay to do that because you feel so much better and there's nothing wrong with it. So we're only human, people.
Yeah. Well, if there is a silver lining here, I have seen a genuine human interest between people, for people, about people, trying to help each other. And I really hope that's a lesson that we do take from this long after COVID is gone. So I want to thank all of you and JB for making this happen, for our participants, for those of you watching afterwards. Hopefully this is helpful as we try to navigate this, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.